We are continuing our study of the resurrection of 1 Corinthians chapter 15. We've been focused on what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 15:56 when he said that the resurrection would be when sin, the sting of death, would be overcome. And we've been looking at the comparison between Romans 5-8 and 1 Corinthians chapter 15. And particularly, we've been in Romans chapter 8. Now, this may be a bit redundant, all right? But it's so critical that you catch the power of the point that Paul makes. Paul says in Romans chapter 8 and verse 10, if Christ is in you, the body is dead. Now, I pointed out that for the traditional view, this is extremely problematic because it has Paul saying that only if Christ is in us do we die biologically. Do we really honestly want to take that position? Is not the historical, is not the creedal view that because of Adam, not because of Christ, but because of Adam we die biologically? Are we now going to shift gears and to say, well, it's always been true that we die biologically because of Adam, but now, because Christ has come, because of Christ we die biologically? No, that's not what Paul is saying. Paul is not focused on biological life and biological death. And let me reiterate a point that I've made over the last couple of videos. Paul is saying if and only if Christ is in you, the body is dead. Now, look, folks, if a person is in Christ or not, they're going to die biologically. But for Paul, the condition of the death that he is talking about, the condition for the death of the body of death that he's talking about, is Christ being in them. If Christ did not dwell in them, that body was not dead. But let me reiterate. If he's talking about biological death, that makes no sense whatsoever, because whether or not a person is in Christ, whether a person has Christ dwelling in them, does not matter biologically. They and we will die biologically whether or not Christ is in us. Furthermore, let me drive this point home one more time, just like I did in the last video. Been a while though, so you may have forgotten. Not only does Paul say, if Christ is in you, the body is dead, but he also says, if the Spirit of Christ dwells in you, then you'll be raised. Then you'll have life. So, if the Spirit of Christ dwells in you, you will live. If Christ is in you, the body is dead. Now, Paul is giving a very clear conditional statement. If the Spirit of the one who raised up Christ dwells in you, you will live. That means if the Spirit of Christ does not dwell, there is no life, right? If the Spirit dwelt, life. If Christ was in them, the body was dead. You cannot say that Paul is talking about biological life and death. Or else, without Christ, the body is not dead. Without Christ, we do not die biologically. But I think everyone can see the fallacy of that. If Christ is in you, the body is dead. He does not say, well, you're going to die eventually, and we're all subject to sin, and we're all subject to that death, but Christ will eventually give us life. No, if Christ is in you, you're dead. The body is dead. It is absolutely imperative, in order to understand what Paul is teaching here about life, or about death and life and resurrection, that we grasp the conditionality of his statement, if Christ is in you, the body is dead. And if the Spirit of him who raised up Christ from the dead dwells in you, he will raise you. If no spirit, no life, if Christ is not in you, the body is not dead. Thus, if Paul is talking about biological life and death, that would have Paul saying, you know, if Christ doesn't dwell in you, you're going to live physically forever. No, obviously, that's wrong. Paul is very clear. If, and only if, Christ is in you, the body is dead. And we've got more on resurrection from Paul, and we'll see you on the flip side.